Welcome back to part 6 of Trump, the Magnificence of America. Nobody's picture perfect. Before the abrupt ending in part 5, we'll go back a few sentences there. You know, you see all the talk about Hillary Clinton's doppelgangers or doubles or this, that, and, you know, twins and things like that people are talking about because of her illness and everything. Well, you know, would it be too outlandish if I said that James G. Blaine was back from history? Let's see how that is. Most people would think that's crazy. Wait till you see the what's going on here. This here's a small picture of James G. Blaine. All you have to do is go look him up, and you'll see his picture. There's no resemblance or anything, but this here is a picture of him, and we'll pick up here where we left off. The Republican nominee for president in 1884 was James G. Blaine. 1/31/1830 is an 8 program. Mr. Blaine is running an 8 program. The Polarity is a 3 program. Hillary Clinton, 10/26/1947, is a 3 program. I'm sure many people are laughing at this point. This is actually another way history is cloaked, so it is not easily recognizable and seen as playing over and over and over again. This is another reason no one has found it yet. I look at it as abstract thinking versus linear thinking. If a person can think both ways, they have a big advantage over someone that possesses either one or the other. We have 2 polarities between James G. Blaine and Hillary Clinton. Let's look at those first. James G. Blaine was a Republican. Hillary Clinton was a Republican before 1968, but has been a Democrat since then. One of the James G. Blaine's opponents, they had a saying when referring to James G. Blaine. They chanted, "James G. Blaine, the continental liar from the state of Maine." Have you heard anything said about Hillary Clinton being a liar? James G. Blaine was a man. Hillary Clinton is a woman. That's another polarity. Now let's look at the similarities. Some might think, how could there be? In 1884, James G. Blaine was nominated as the Republican nominee in Chicago, Illinois. The building the nomination took place in no longer stands today. In 1947, out of anywhere in the country Hillary Clinton could have been born, she was born at the Edgewater Hospital in Chicago, Illinois, a half-mile from where the building once stood where James G. Blaine was nominated. Even through high school, Hillary Clinton was raised within 30 miles of where James G. Blaine was nominated. In 1962, Hillary Clinton went to watch and meet Martin Luther King Jr. as he spoke at Orchestra Hall. Orchestra Hall overlooks where the building once stood that James G. Blaine was nominated in. James G. Blaine was a supporter of black suffrage, the right to vote. Hillary Clinton, following the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination, organized a 2-day strike at Wellesley College where she attended in New York. She helped blacks recruit more black students and faculty. James G. Blaine failed twice to obtain the Republican presidential nomination prior to 1884. Hillary Clinton failed in 2008 to obtain the Democratic presidential nomination. James G. Blaine was a United States Senator. Hillary Clinton was a United States Senator. James G. Blaine was a United States Senator from Maine, the state of Maine. Hillary Clinton attended Maine, M-A-I-N-E, just like the state is spelled. Hillary Clinton attended Maine East High School in Chicago, and her senior year she was redistricted to Maine, M-A-I-N-E, once again, South High School. James G. Blaine was Secretary of State. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. James G. Blaine wanted to attend Yale to obtain a law degree but changed his mind. Hillary Clinton went to Yale and obtained her law degree. James G. Blaine had a scandal in 1876 involving Little Rock and Fort Smith railroad bonds. Hillary Clinton was the First Lady of Arkansas and lived in Little Rock, Arkansas. James G. Blaine, throughout his political life, had a reputation for scandals, mainly involving railroads. Hillary Clinton has a reputation for scandals: Whitewater, Travelgate, Filegate, cattle futures controversy, Benghazi, war in Libya, email scandal, etc. Then there is the article. I am going to read that whole article here. This is what I said in the book. Then there is the article from the Washington Times writer Mike Henry from November 14th, 2016. And we will continue with that article. I won't read the rest of that. This article from Mike Henry is from Sunday, February 14th, 2016, from the Washington Times. The title of this article is Hillary Clinton's James G. Blaine Problem. Yeah, I say she has a problem with James G. Blaine. Let's see. Hillary Clinton, the presumptive Democratic nominee for President of the United States, has a lingering problem that may derail her quest to become the first woman chief executive. Her once seemingly insurmountable lead in the polls has vanished, as even those voters who admire her record and abilities have begun to question her forthrightness and honesty. To hear her tell it, this sort of thing is both unfair and unprecedented, but it's happened before. Her current situation closely resembles that of another gifted politician who dealt with accusations of malfeasance and dishonesty that, in part, cost him the White House. Mrs. Clinton and her advisers would do well to look back in history to the travails that cost James G. Blaine, considered by many in his day to have a lock on the presidency, because, to put it bluntly, Mrs. Clinton has a James G. Blaine problem. Mr. Blaine, like Mrs. Clinton, had one heck of a resume. He was Speaker of the House of Representatives from 1869 to 1875, a senator from 1876 to 1881, and served as Secretary of State in the 1880s and 1890s. A consummate politician, Blaine was depicted by his supporters as the plumed knight, who battled the corrupt stalwart leaders in his own party, who they were convinced was destined for the White House, yet he never made it. In politics, timing can be everything, and Blaine was destined to make his run at a bad time for an insider. He came to prominence in the Gilded Age, when political honesty was at a premium. It was a time of government malfeasance, an era of good stealing, according to some historians, as the scandal of Ulysses Grant's presidency defined the political landscape. This corruption left a residue of resentment among American voters, and honesty in government became the sine qua non for anyone seeking office. In 1876, Mr. Blaine appeared to have the Republican nomination locked up until charges of a sweetheart deal with the Little Rock and Fort Smith Railroad surfaced. It was alleged that he received a $64,000 loan using railroad bonds as collateral and never repaid the debt. He defended himself, saying he had no direct or indirect dealings with the railroad, and claimed the charges were politically motivated by his day's equivalent of Mrs. Clinton's vast right-wing conspiracy. He blasted his critics as unreconstructed rebels. Okay, let's take a pause in the article there. This was during just past the time of the Civil War, when Reconstruction of the United States was still going on. But James G. Blaine called his critics unreconstructed rebels. What is James G. Blaine, as Hillary Clinton calling her critics today? Deplorables and irredeemable. It's a real close synonym to unreconstructed rebels. So now, back to the article. He blasted his critics as unreconstructed rebels, intent upon punishing him for refusing to support a pardon for Jefferson Davis. The public seemed willing to overlook what he had apparently successfully portrayed as partisan attacks from those who would say anything to sully his reputation, until the release of what became known as the Mulligan Letters. James Mulligan was a Boston bookkeeper who possessed letters that purported to show Mr. Blaine had profited from the railroad deal. When they came to light, Mr. Blaine went on the attack in an attempt to discredit Mulligan by saying he had a grudge against him from an unrelated business deal. Mr. Blaine asked to see the letters, but when he got his hands on them, he wouldn't return them, claiming they were private and personal, and even refused to turn the letters over to a congressional committee investigating the charges. Mr. Blaine, like Mrs. Clinton today, launched attack after attack on the source and content of the letters in an attempt to limit any damaging fallout. He even appeared on the floor of the House of Representatives to read selected parts of the letters that he and presumably his lawyers concluded should be turned over while refusing access to the rest. The crisis seemed to pass in the face of this strategy and the desire of others to move on. Yet, as it turned out, he could never really escape the damage to his reputation as rumors of wrongdoing, stonewalling, and self-dealing persisted. In spite of all this, Mr. Blaine ran unsuccessfully against, and I won't say that name, in 1884 because that's coming up as Donald Trump, and I'm not going there yet. In spite of all this, Mr. Blaine ran unsuccessfully against blank in 1884. The old questions about his honesty quickly dogged him throughout the campaign, and while other factors contributed to the outcome, the troubling doubts about his integrity played a major role in his loss. The eerie similarities between the events that ended Mr. Blaine's quest for the presidency and those Mrs. Clinton faces today are worth noting. The Mulligan Letters and Mrs. Clinton's emails controversy have been handled in roughly the same way by the two candidates. But as the results in Iowa and New Hampshire seem to suggest, she has not escaped the sort of damage to her reputation that undermined the public's willingness to trust Mr. Blaine more than a century ago. Unless she finds a way to reassure the voters about her probity, she, like Mr. Blaine, may find that the step from Secretary of State to the White House is one she will never make. Yogi Berra, in contemplating the similarities, might have observed that it sounds like deja vu all over again. Mike Henry is the writer of that article. He did an excellent job, and we can see that, yes, even something like that, when they start comparing current personages with those in history, should be a red flag that, something's playing back. So basically, James G. Blaine is back. That's Hillary Clinton. Okay, so yeah, that's crazy enough. Let's see. Where am I going to pick up here? Okay. That was the last thing that I found, that article, when comparing these two figures. It put the icing on the cake. But anytime you see an article like that comparing a present figure with a past figure, go dig into it with what I showed you. You could find a big historical playback going on. One thing on Hillary Clinton, when a 3 program as she runs doesn't receive the love it craves, it becomes controlling. I've heard many say that, how she is so controlling. As we move into the husband and wife team vying for the White House, I would like to make an observation of Melania Trump and the quote she made to a reporter. Mrs. Trump was asked, "Which First Lady would you most be like?" Mrs. Trump replied, "Betty Ford or Jacqueline Kennedy." And the idea... Wait, hold on. Okay, which First Lady would you most be like? Mrs. Trump replied, "Betty Ford or Jacqueline Kennedy." How did she come to that conclusion? I bet it was her program interfacing with the programs that Betty Ford and Jacqueline Kennedy ran, even though they are both deceased. While reading about them, all that Mrs. Trump would have to do is see a photo of Betty Ford or Jacqueline Kennedy, and the idea would come into Mrs. Trump's mind, wow, I really like them. Okay, let's see if I'm correct. Jacqueline Kennedy, 7/28/1929, is a 2 program. That is the same 2 program that Melania Trump is running. That's a winner. Mrs. Trump's program found its twin, and I'm sure she didn't even realize it. Now we look at Betty Ford. 4/8/1918 is a 4 program. Oh well, there is that most compatible 4 program to Mrs. Trump that her husband Donald Trump runs. Even though Mr. Trump is a man and Betty Ford is a woman, the only thing different is brain physiology and physical makeup. A 4 program comes off slightly different in a man than a woman, but at the quantum level where we interface, our advanced holographic program never mistakes a 4 program for, say, a 7 program. All of our programs are smart beyond our comprehension. So yes, I was correct. Mrs. Trump rocks the quantum world. She picked her own twin and Mr. Trump's twin. If Mrs. Trump looked into other first ladies, one that she would probably like is Dolly Madison, 5/20/1768, that same 2 program Mrs. Trump runs. And one of the most, she's one of the most popular first ladies of all time, and in another twin 2 program of Mrs. Trump. This leads us to our final introduction of this enigmatic couple back from the pages of history, a couple that were so popular in the 1880s that instead of having paparazzi follow them, they had sketch artists. It took me a half an hour of research, and what I saw was a specter of greatness looming on the horizon of American politics in the year 2016. This president is ranked between the 8th and 23rd greatest of all time, depending upon historian. He had the nicknames of Ugly Honest, the Beast of Buffalo, and his obstinacy. He was a political outsider sent to derail corrupt Washington, D.C. in the Gilded Age. The woman whom became his wife, and that is a story unto its own, which we will cover, she was described as a statuesque beauty with dark brown hair and dark blue eyes. Anyone sound familiar yet? Even in the 1880s, this First Lady was setting fashion trends. We now begin this wondrous comparisons of Melania Trump and Frances Folsom, and then end up with the jaw-dropping comparisons of Donald Trump and Stephen Grover Cleveland, more commonly known as Grover Cleveland. We will finish with a review of the 1884 nomination of Grover Cleveland and the general election of 1884. And by the end of this chapter, it will be abundantly clear why the 2016 Republican nomination had to be held in Cleveland, Ohio. Now we begin. Frances Folsom Cleveland, 7/21/1864, is a 2 program. Melania Trump Nouse, 4/26/1970, is a 2 program. Frances Folsom was described as a statuesque beauty. Melania Trump is a statuesque beauty. Frances Folsom was a Presbyterian. Melania Trump is a Presbyterian. Frances Folsom became America's sweetheart, and many companies asked her to endorse their product. Melania Trump has endorsed products and has her own company. Frances Folsom appeared on the covers of Harper's & Lee in 1887 and became a fashion trendsetter for women all over the country. Melania Trump is a fashion model and has appeared on numerous fashion and magazine covers worldwide. The Cleveland Library was built in 1911 and was named in honor of Frances Folsom Cleveland. The Cleveland Hall of Languages houses the fields of modern languages and international studies. Melania Trump speaks 5 languages. Frances Folsom Cleveland was 27 years younger than Grover Cleveland. Melania Trump is 24 years younger than Donald Trump. Frances Folsom was born in Buffalo, New York. It was only after returning from a 9-month trip to Europe did she wed Mr. Cleveland. Melania Trump was born in Europe, Slovenia, and came to the United States. Excuse me. I'm sure there's a lot more comparisons to draw between Frances Folsom and Melania Trump. However, due to time constraints, I didn't dig any deeper. As we move on to the incredible comparisons between Donald Trump and Grover Cleveland, please continue to research these 2 incredible figures. Mr. Trump continues to say and do things that link him to his historical twin, Grover Cleveland. We start in a different place than usual. In a 2006 interview on The View, I think I'm going to pause this one right here, and that would give me, boy, that's still pushing it. Let's see here. I had something else. Okay, first of all, let's do an update on this book, and then we're going to pause it here, and we'll get into these comparisons. And this is just one thing that's happened recently. Here's an update to this book in regards to the crude sexual remarks made by Donald Trump in regards to Nancy O'Dell in 2005. My line of thought regarding Donald Trump and Grover Cleveland is this. If Trump talked about it, I bet Grover Cleveland did it, or something very close to it. Grover Cleveland hardly looks like a womanizer in his photos. His supporters called him Grover the Good, and was known above all as an honest man. But then in July of 1884, the Buffalo Evening Telegram ran a front-page article entitled A Terrible Tale. It painted Grover Cleveland in a new light. The story tells how Grover Cleveland, as a young lawyer in Buffalo, had met a widow named Maria Halpin. The out-of-wedlock encounters produced a son later named Oscar Folsom Cleveland. Some historians state Mr. Cleveland took responsibility for the child because Mr. Cleveland's law partner and close friend, Oscar Folsom, who was married, was actually the father, but Mr. Cleveland took responsibility so his close friend, Oscar Folsom, didn't receive the fallout from the sex scandal from his wife or the media, and probably would have closed his law business in that day and age. There was charges Grover Cleveland tried to silence Maria Halpin and have her institutionalized. Mr. Cleveland had a reputation of carousing with women. Cartoons like Ma Ma, Where's My Pa appeared everywhere. Newspapers called Grover Cleveland a moral leper and worse. Look how they're doing Donald Trump today over words that he said about women and things, accusations and things that are going on. Mr. Cleveland, rather than deny his sex scandal, admitted to it, disputed the overblown facts, and continued his campaign. The scandal actually gave Mr. Cleveland's campaign new energy because of his honesty. It was also alleged that James G. Blaine had a child out of wedlock, but he explained it away by saying he married his wife twice. Now remember, James G. Blaine is Hillary Clinton's polarity back from history. So what has she done that is not quite exactly the same, but something similar? Let's see what this is. It was alleged also James G. Blaine had a child out of wedlock, but he explained it away by saying he married his wife twice. The first time secretly, and months later after she was pregnant publicly. As we've seen that Hillary Clinton is James G. Blaine returning from history as his polarity in this election, it makes me wonder if Chelsea Clinton's father is actually Webster Hubbell, as many propose. The insight that can be found from the past presents an eerie clarity to present-day events.